Hello, my name is CJ Gray, and today I will be talking about FEMA flood maps. So, what is a FEMA flood map? A FEMA flood map is a map that shows floodplain areas. These are typically very broad areas, but they are useful because they are open to the public, and a lot of companies actually use these FEMA flood maps. More specifically, insurance and mortgage companies. If you're in a moderate to high flood risk area, chances are you're going to have to pay flood insurance, and insurance companies look at these FEMA flood maps to see who needs to be paying flood insurance and who, or mainly just who needs to be paying flood insurance. Um, these FEMA flood maps are actually used by surveyors too, and I will get into that on a later slide. The most important thing to remember is that these FEMA flood maps are not super accurate. Like I said before, they are very broad, so they are not specific to individual parcels. This means that somebody could be deemed in a high flood risk area, but actually have minimal risk of flooding depending on their grade and elevation. How are these maps made? They are made by generalizing flood zones based on elevations. So if you're in a low elevation place next to a river or a lake, chances are you're going to be in a moderate to high flood risk area. And it's important to know where your parcel lies, because uh, there's different codes and regulations on building in moderate to high flood risk areas. You have to meet certain elevation requirements to be able to build, and you have to get certain specialized permits to also be able to build. And some people actually end up putting their houses on stilts to meet these requirements. So, flood maps and surveying. Surveyors use FEMA flood maps very regularly. It's good practice to when you get a job to look up that parcel and see where it lies on them flood maps, because a surveyor want to might want to or need to make specific notes on a plat and include those. But the most common reason for a surveyor to use a FEMA flood map is while performing flood elevation certificates. So what a surveyor does is they come in and they locate a finished floor elevation, also an FFE, and they locate the lowest adjacent grade, or LAG. And a lot of people will get flood elevation certificates if they're in a um, flood zone where they have to pay flood insurance, but they feel like they have a very low risk of being flooded and want to get out of that insurance, then they can get a flood elevation certificate um, done by a surveyor, and the insurance company will review it and see if they want to get rid of their flood insurance, or if they still have to keep it. And also vice versa. Some people are wanting to build in a place that they know has a good chance of being flooded, and they want that flood insurance for if they do get flooded. Also, surveyors can give good advice on, you know, where they fall in a flood zone, and the different elevation benchmarks that are around them. So that's good. So there's different zones when it comes to these FEMA flood maps, and these different zones, they mean different things, and it is important to know what zone a specific parcel falls in. So like zone D is an undetermined risk. They don't know if it's likely to get flooded or not. Um, a low risk would be zone C and X. Um, Moderate risk zones B and X, and then high risk zones A, AE, A1 through 30, AH, AO, and A99. And then you've also got a coastal high risk. So it is extremely important to know where a parcel falls, and what these different zones actually mean in terms of the flood risk. So key points I'd like you to take away from this presentation. Um, these flood maps are very overgeneralized. They're based on a broad area, so they're not specific to each parcel, like I've said before. So it is important to know that, and you can be classified in a moderate to high risk flood zone, but the chances of you actually getting flooded could be very slim. And vice versa, you could actually be in a area where it says you're low risk of flooding, but your chances of getting flooded are moderate or high risk. Um, but with that being said, these FEMA flood maps are still very useful when it comes to information. Um, and also, the different zones mean different things, so it is important to know where a parcel falls in these zones and what that means in terms of flood risk. Thank you guys very much. Oh, and this is also my references that I use for my pictures and to gather my information. Thank you.